Hey, welcome everybody. This is a little bit out of the ordinary because as technology goes, whenever I did this originally live, this webinar, for some reason it did not record. So I am going to redo the whole webinar for the people who signed up for the webinar and weren't able to make it tonight. And so that way you'll be able to watch it from beginning to end. Now this is the same webinar I gave everyone who's in attendance, but the only difference is uh, we won't necessarily have the give and take of the dialogue that we had during some specific questions on some of the points I'll make in this webinar. So if you have any questions after I finish this, feel free to reach out to me. My email address is at the end of this webinar, and I'd be happy to answer anything you have. So we'll start from here. Natural storytelling, your guide to engaging photo essays. And someone in the presentation mentioned that photo essays in the age of social media are really a lost art. And what I mean by photo essays are a collection of stories that kind of all tie together to one central theme and help kind of tell some sort of story, in this case about the natural world. And with things like Instagram and Facebook, where you really can't lay things out in sort of a logical order, or you're only having to do one picture at a time. It really kind of lacks that engagement. And so what I always encourage people to do, well, if you can't share it, well, people, you may ask, if you can't share it on social media, what's the whole point of even having a photo essay? And I think the point of having a photo essay for me, it's a lot of the work I do for magazines. I think for other people, like people who attend workshops or people who just go out and take pictures for themselves and for fun or for family, I think it's a real natural way and a good skill to learn so that you can put those pictures in like a book that you have made at Shutterfly or Blurb or one of the other many book manufacturers. And so I believe that this approach to natural storytelling I'm going to talk about tonight really benefits you in a lot of ways. More than anything, it just gets you out shooting pictures. Shooting pictures is a learned behavior. It's muscle memory, and it's like any other activity. The more you go out and shoot, the better photographer you're going to become. So, with that said, I'm Russell Graves. You probably already know that. I was coming to you live. I am coming to you now from Hackberry Farm in Dodge City, Texas, but not. This is a recorded version of what I did earlier live. And so you may ask yourself, what's a photo essay? And it's a series of photos used to tell a story about a particular subject. And there's all kinds of ways of telling stories. We tell stories as humans in spoken word and, of course, the written word. And then even from a photographic medium or a motion picture medium, we tell stories. And so really the challenge is, how do you tell an engaging story about a subject and tell it in such a way that people can kind of follow the narrative, whether you're there to, if there's no words behind it, and if you're not there to kind of whisper over the shoulder of what's going on in the pictures. And so that's the approach we're going to talk about tonight. And so the reason why I love photo essays is there's many of them. In the beginning, I'll tell you why I love photo essays is because when I was probably 16, 17 years old and first got interested in photography, my dad, someone gave him a subscription to this magazine called Texas Parks and Wildlife Magazine. And in that magazine, he showed me a photo essay in there, and it was about the sand dunes in West Texas and just beautiful photos. I can't remember who took them, but he told me, he said, when you can start getting pictures in this magazine, that's when you've really done something. And that was kind of my jumping off moment. And so from that point, I started studying photo essays. I write letters to the people who did the pictures in the photo essays and try to learn their approach. And so over time, I started developing sort of my own style of how I do photo essays. And what we'll talk about tonight are some of the specific ways that I approach almost every subject that I'm going to try to tell a story about, and sort of the reason behind it. It's one of the difficult things when you teach things is, I mean, I at some point what I do becomes sort of second nature to me, but how do you teach that to someone else? And so I think I found a way to distill it down into some simple concepts that I'll share with you that I think will honestly help not only your pursuit of telling natural stories, but also just your photography skills in general. But the reason why I love photo essays, it allows you to create a long-term photo project on a single subject. And so in essence, that's what a photos essay is about. It could be a location, it could be a particular animal, it could be a group of animals, it can really be anything, but it allows you to create and focus on a single subject at a time. And that's important because, like me, I've got my favorite animals, and the ability to kind of follow them along and learn more about them and really kind of take an in-depth look at their life really enriches me personally. Not only does it is it part of the business that I run. And you can also learn a lot about a particular subject. I'll share a couple of anecdotes with you as we go along about some things I learned in particular, particularly this gray egret. This is actually shot on my property. I've got a wetland on my property, and this was shot, this great egret of it fishing on the property. And so I learned a lot about those birds when I started doing this, when I started working on a long-term photo subject about that wetland. And then you can learn a ton about any kind of particular subject, whether it's a location or a particular species of animals. Oops. And I mentioned this earlier, it helps you hone your photography skills. Pick any activity that you enjoy doing, whether it's golf, whether it's softball, whether it's, quilt making, whatever that thing is. If you want to get good at it, you've got to put in the time. And so with photography, there's really no silver bullets. I mean, I guess there probably are some people who are just naturally talented. They're like a duck to water. You put a camera in their hand, if they've never used one, they figure it out pretty quick and they get good pretty quick. But for the most part, most of us, including me, sort of have to learn as you go. And so by picking a subject, committing to a long-term project about it, and making the time to go out and shoot pictures around that subject, it's just going to make you a better photographer because you're out seeing the world in a different way, looking at the world in a different way, and then taking pictures. And the whole cause and effect of photography. You press a button, you make a picture that you think looks good. And so what did you do to do that? And just be able to replicate it over and over again. And it teaches nonverbal storytelling skills. I think if you've watched many of these webinars or if you've been with me on a workshop, I love to tell stories. And this is just one way of telling stories for me is just laying pictures out in a way that kind of makes sense that, again, whether you're there or not to narrate it, people can still get the gist of it. And towards the end of this presentation, I'm gonna show you where the rubber meets the road. I'm gonna lay out some pictures I did for a project a while back, and sort of show you the approach that I'm about to teach you and sort of how it looks in real world practice. Yeah, here's that egret I was talking about. Before I photographed this one particular egret, I always thought they were big dumb birds. I really never paid much attention to them, and it was just sort of background things in the background that I'd make note of when I saw it, but I never really paid attention to them. And then that all changed on one evening in April, about a year ago, I think it was, and I went and sat in the blind on my wetland and watched those things hunt, and just saw how of a cunning and skillful hunter they are, and just really got like this bird. You can see all the green around the side. Just really realized how beautiful a bird they are, and so spending one time in the field with these birds, it gave me a newfound respect for them. But one of the things I learned, and you can kind of see it in this picture, if you look in the water in the background, you see kind of a highlight area in the water, a shiny area, but it's a horizontal line, but there's a dark spot in the middle of it. And so that dark spot's important because when I was watching this bird feed, I would notice all these shadows kind of moving around it as it walked through the water. And I couldn't figure out what those shadows were until one popped its head up, and they were turtles. And at first I thought these turtles are hunting cooperatively with this egret. Well, and so that was kind of the thesis I had in my mind. And so I went back again. Remember, the whole point about telling or one of the points about telling a photo essay is you just, because you're around it and you're being intentional about your photography and about your subjects, you just learn more about it you just learn more about your subject from an observational standpoint. And so when I went back again, I realized my thesis was wrong. They're not cooperatively hunting. What the turtles would do was every time this egret would catch a crawfish in this case, and you can see he's got most of it in his bill, but if you look below its bill, you see a bit of it falling off. And so those turtles were scavengers. Every time it would drop food in the water, those turtles would gather around and try to eat the bits that the egret didn't eat. And so it was really a cool thing to see. It's one of those things that if you don't like nature, you really don't get it. But if you like nature, just the nuances of things you see in nature like that are really what makes going out special. And so I was able to learn that when I shot this picture here. But the elements of photo essays is you got to think like a movie director. And if you watch any movie, you know, this is just a few days after the Academy Awards are over, and looking at the list of movies, I think the only one I saw was Top Gun of everything that was nominated. Uh, but if you watch any movie, you'll realize that movies are put together in sort of a semi-predictable kind of way in terms of the shots they use, the style of shots they use, and sort of how they it's everything's laid out in like a 3-act play where the first act you're setting the scene and introducing the characters, and then the second act you're able to in the second act that's where the character development takes place, and you know, whatever that character, whatever his struggle is, you know, whether it's man against man, man against nature, or whatever else, that's where that part of the story kind of lays out. And then the third act is kind of resolution. How does it all sort of end? And how does, you know, whether it's a happy or a sad ending, every story has beginning, middle, and end. And so how does the story end? And so those 3 acts is how I start from a photo standpoint and a photo essay standpoint. I start thinking like a movie director. Well, one of the basic elements of thinking like a movie director is you got to take a variety of shots, and a wide, medium, and close-up shot. And so if you look at a movie, it's the same 3 basic shots all the time, and they're in different sequences. And sure, sometimes they'll have the camera moving, or it's panning across a wide landscape, or it's doing something else. But every movie, if you start paying attention, has the same basic 3 shots: a wide, medium, and a close-up shot. Now, I guess there may be some exceptions where they're all shot close up, or they're all shot medium, or all shot wide. But every movie ever made, or just about every movie ever made, or every movie I can think of, is all sort of formulaic. They're using these things, 3 basic shots, mixing them up to tell different aspects of the story, where that way the story stays interesting and it helps carry the narrative of the story from beginning to the middle to the end. And so we're using those same cues as a movie director uses to think about how we lay out our story. And so wide shots I consider 16 to 50 millimeters. And so what the wide shots do is they set the scene. It may be a landscape shot like this one, where we're showing some rugged mountains. They're not the classical snow-capped peaks. They're just low, rugged, I guess some would even call them hills. But the key part is you've got this this valley with these rugged, rocky hills in the background. And so the wide shot sets the scene. Whenever I think of the most classic scene setting shot I can think of in a movie, it's usually at the first of No Country for Old Men. And in that shot, the opening scene is a big wide shot of far West Texas out near Marfa. And it's just classical West Texas. You can see the high mountain, the desert prairies that are out there, as well as the mesas in the distance. And it's really, really good at setting the scene and showing how desolate that landscape is. And so when you set the scene like this, all of a sudden the landscape becomes a character. And so if you're, again, back to what I said about thinking like a movie director, if we're thinking in terms of telling a photo story and telling a natural story, you've got your main character, whatever that subject is that you're following, but you've also got supporting characters too. You know, the supporting characters, one of them may be the landscape, and oftentimes the landscape does become the character. I would argue in No Country for Old Men that the landscape is one of the characters in the movie, because it's that tough landscape that whole movie is set against. And so when you set the scene, you introduce the landscape as one of the characters in the story that you're trying to tell. And another shot I always like to try to get are medium shots. And let me back up a second. One of the things, if you ever seen any of my YouTube videos, and I think I might have mentioned this a time or two in a webinar, but whenever I'm taking pictures of wildlife, I always try to get 3 main shots. And the first shot's what I call the yearbook shot. That is, you know, think about your yearbook picture. It's just kind of a not real creative shot of just you, where when someone looks at that picture, they just know it's you. And, you know, you're not doing anything in particular, you're just sitting there staring at the camera. So I usually try to get the yearbook shot of wildlife. The second shot I always try to get, which is a shot like this, is a little bit wider shot of the wildlife. You can still tell what's in it, but you're also kind of giving hints to the way where the animal lives. And so that's the second shot I always try to get, is sort of an activity shot, or I'm sorry, not activity shot, but environmental portrait shot of just kind of setting the stage where the animal lives. And then the third shot I always try to do on those 3 basic shots of wildlife is a close-up shot, or I'm sorry, not a close-up shot, a shot of the animal doing something that's endemic to that animal. You know, it's maybe the egret feeding, or maybe a couple of white-tailed deer fighting or whatever, but it's something that animal does. And so it's a behavior shot of the animal. So with wildlife photography, yearbook shot, environmental portrait shot, and then an animal doing something that it does instead of just standing there. But in this context, we talked about the wide shot of setting the scene. The medium shots help add context. In other words, it helps tie the scene to your subject, or the scene to the star of the show. And so in this case, the star of the show are bighorn sheep. And so this isn't a tight shot of bighorn sheep, it's a medium shot, but all of a sudden we go back and we look at this one that set the scene. You can kind of get an overall feel of the landscape and where we're at, but there's no really detail to it other than, you know, we know it's some mountains and some trees and some water, but there's not much else you can extrapolate from that. Well, when you start with your medium shots, all of a sudden it's giving you a little bit of context. You know, we can see that this animal lives amongst the rocks, because you can see some rocks strewn against there. It lives on the side of the hills. You can see the hill there. It lives amongst some sage. And so it's giving you all these little context clues about that animal. And it may be subliminal, but if you stare at the pictures and look at the pictures long enough, you start to figure that out. So all of a sudden we've set the scene. We've made the landscape our character. The medium shots, we're just adding context because we're trying to tie our main character into the landscape around it. And then from there, you start thinking about close-up shots. And those, you know, we talked about the yearbook shot. This would be an example of a yearbook shot of this bighorn sheep, but just some close-up shots where you can see detail in the animal and almost tell sort of individual characters within the essay you're trying to do. And so the close-up shots introduce the characters in whatever narrative you're trying to tell, whether it's you know, a photo essay for a magazine, or a photo essay for a book, or a photo essay that you're presenting at a camera club, or a photo essay you're wanting to share with someone on a website. It's all sort of the same thing. So you're, by thinking like a movie director, you're shooting a wide angle shot, a close-up shot, and a medium shot to set the context. Now, one of the things I encourage people to do, like when I go to Katmai and we go see bears there, people go there to see the bears. Well, one of the things I try to encourage people to do is, you know, the bears are cool, but don't get wrapped up on bears, because those bears aren't, the sum of those bears' existence isn't just standing at the edge of the waterfall eating the fish that jump up to them. I mean, they make tracks along the beach. They live in a broader landscape. They swim. They do all kinds of stuff. So I encourage them to start thinking of telling the bear story, not from this one, well, not from the singular one-dimension activity they do, but really kind of tell the bigger story of where they live. And the reason why I encourage them to do that is, you know, a year from now, 2 years from now, when you're thinking back on that experience, you want to be able to tell a broader narrative about, this is where we went, this is what it looked like, this is where the bears live. And oh yeah, by the way, since we set the scene, here's all the things the bears do within that movie to help make up that natural story. And then I always tell people too that good stories, or every story ever told, is made up of three things: a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, that's why you kind of allude to the 3-act play. You got a beginning, you got a middle, and you got an end, or a 3-act movie. And then but the things that make the stories better are the details. That's the glue that holds the narrative together. So we've got our subjects. We know the landscape they live in. We've got the medium shots that give some context. We've got the close-up shots that introduce our characters. But the details that you'll start to see in the natural world are really the glue that kind of glues everything together, that helps carry the narrative forward. And so detail shots in a typical photo essay may only make up 10% of the pictures, but they're an important 10% because they help round out that story and help kind of fill in the gaps where you may not be able to with the standard three scene approach like we talked about earlier. And so what I mean by details, it may be the detail of leaves, you know, that's just endemic to that scene where you're shooting at, or it you know, these pictures are not related to one another. Like the one in the upper right is of just the cracked ground. Back in about 10 years ago, we had a pretty bad drought across Texas. And during that drought, you know, when you're trying to tell the story of the drought, it's, you know, and how it affects wildlife, you know, you can go and take wide shots of the landscape and how parched it is. You can go take pictures of animals drinking from a dried up water hole. That's easy enough. You can take close-up shots of animals But then when you start thinking about details, how does the drought really affect everything? And so a shot like this really tells a lot in a story. It's a simple composition, but it tells a lot in a story. And then from a design standpoint, let's say you are making a book, these shots are great for doing a double page spread, then you can lay other pictures on top of those. And so these detail shots work great. Again, I don't have a better way to describe it, as they work as almost like the glue that sort of binds the other story elements together. And so I always encourage people to look up and look down and be thinking of details. And I'll tell you, the one paying attention to details is the one of the things that I think helped with the success as me as a photographer, and as long as I've been doing it. And then one of the other things I love doing is I love animal tracks. And every time I find a good, clean set of animal tracks, I'll take it, because let's say we mentioned the bears earlier. Let's say if you got pictures of bear tracks from one spot, well, if you got a good clean picture like this, well, that's pretty nondescript picture. So if I was doing a photo essay a year from now about white-tailed deer and I never found any good tracks, I could go back in my library and substitute that picture in, because it's timeless. You don't know when it was or where it was, but it still fits in when you're telling the narrative of a story at some point in the future. And that happens a lot of time on wildlife documentaries. You watch wildlife documentaries and they may be following a bear, but a lot of times if you pay close attention, that there may be 2 or 3 different bears they're following, but they kind of name it one bear and be able to tie the narrative together. And so that's what I'm suggesting here. If you start collecting detail shots of wherever you go, those pictures can be used for the project you're working on then, but they may also can be used for another project later on. And so one of the key things is how do you keep up with all these pictures you need to take, and that thinking about the shot list and thinking like a movie director. Well, what I've done forever is I make shot lists. I still make shot lists. Back in the old days when I shot film, I would make a list and tape it to the back of my camera to keep me on track. Today, we've all got smartphones, and it's easy to make a shot list in the notes app on your phone. And just what I'll write in there is, let's say I'm going to Florida and to the Everglades and trying to tell a story about the birds and wildlife there, I may tell myself, hey, make sure you take a landscape shots of the sawgrass swamps, and take a landscape shot of the mangrove swamps. And that's one of the things that helps you learn, because it's forcing you to do a little bit of pre-production and a little bit of pre-planning. So before you even go to a place, you're learning about it. And so from that standpoint, I will make a shot list and talk, in the shot list, I'll talk about the yearbook shots of the different animals that I hope to see. And so I start honing down. And as I go through my shot list, now it's a little more automatic for me. But in the beginning, I had to remember it, and I just go through and kind of check the list as I went. And then lookbooks are, let's say I've got a picture of a white-tailed deer. If I was doing a project on elk, and I've got a picture of a white-tailed deer similar to this one, I may take a picture of a whitetail that I took and put in my lookbook. In other words, just make on my iPhone in the Notes app, add pictures to my lookbook that I'm making that says, if I'd like to get a picture of like this white-tailed deer, but of an elk, and maybe it's a silhouette of that animal standing on the side of a ridge. And so it'll help me start honing in and looking for the pictures I really want to try to take. Maybe detail shots too. I want to try to get a detail like this. And so by doing your pre-prep and your pre-production stuff, it's going to help kind of hone you in on that shot list you need to make. And really, if I'm going on a big trip, I do that every single time. I mean, just every single time I'll do it, just because if you're going to spend the time and effort to travel somewhere, to me, it's a shame not to come back with most all the pictures you wanted. You may not get 100% of them, but if you've got kind of a shot list and you can start checking off the boxes, it will make you more creative, because you'll start learning to see the scenes instead of just going out and pressing the button on a camera every time. You start trying to purposely work towards those scenes and take those pictures. And so make shot lists, make lookbooks, think like a movie director, get those 3 main shots: wide, medium, close. The reason why wide sets the scene, makes the landscape a character. The close-up shots introduce your main character of your movie, because every movie has a star of the movie and then all the supporting characters. And what you've got to do, well, no matter what photo project you're working on, you've got to decide who's the star of my movie and what are the supporting characters and then start filling in the blanks from there. I'll make another mention of that here in a minute on that concept. And then the medium shots are the things that the context that help glue the scene to the subject and help sort of bridge the gap and carry that story arc along for you. And then the detail shots are just the glue. They're the kind of fillers that fill in on the gaps and give a little more interest to the overall story. And that's really it. That's sort of my key approach to what I do. What I was going to mention, you go somewhere like Grand Teton National Park, for example. Well, in that case, you could look at a lot of different starring characters, but an easy way to look at a photo essay like that would be the mountains are kind of the star of the show because they're omnipresent everywhere you are, there they are. And so the mountains are always there, and there's such a big presence in that park. So it's easy to say where the mountains are the star of the show, and all the wildlife you're going to see are the different sceneries like Schwabacher's Landing or the Mormon Barns. All of those pieces are supporting characters in a bigger story about the Teton Mountains, and that's a pretty easy way to look at it. Well, you go to somewhere like the Smoky Mountains, for example, and because they're not prominent peaks in the Smoky Mountains, and all of a sudden, or you go to Florida Everglades, all of a sudden you've got a lot of stars in the movie, and it becomes more of an ensemble cast. It's like in the Smokies, for example. Yeah, it's the mountain overlooks, but it's also the waterfalls, and it's also the trees, and it's also the bears and the turkeys and all the wildlife that you're going to see there. So it's a little bit of everything. And so when you start thinking about your subjects as characters in a movie, then thinking like a movie director all of a sudden makes a lot more sense. And then your approach to it becomes more formulaic. And then you're able to start tying all those elements of a story together to be able to tell a good story with your photos. And then research the subject and try to capture as many facets of its natural history as you can. It's really that, I say that simple. Sometimes it takes some time, but that's the beauty of these long-term projects is it forces you to be purposeful in your photography and try to capture as many as you can. My latest fascination are manatees. I photographed manatees about a year ago and got some pretty cool kind of yearbook shots of them, but I know there's a lot more to be done, and I look forward as time goes along to shooting more and more pictures of them and kind of the habitat they live in and sort of what it looks like above the water as well as underwater, and just really trying to capture their life story. I don't have anything it's not like I'm doing this for a magazine project or any kind of media project. It's just something I've taken on as a personal project and want to sort of flesh out as time goes along. And so, and in researching it, I've already learned a ton about manatees that I never would have taken the time to know before. And so here's where the rubber meets the road. This is a project I did a few years ago about turkeys. I used to live in the southeast corner of the Texas Panhandle. I lived for a while in the town of Childress. Now I lived for a while outside the town of Childress because I bought a place and built a house out in the country. And we had turkeys. We had a turkey roost right on the edge of our property. So I fell in love with turkeys, and those birds are so cool. And so when you're talking about the subspecies that lived where I live, the Rio Grande turkeys in the rolling plains, how do you tell a story about them? How do you tell a story about turkey country? And that's what I named this thing. Well, it's thinking like a movie director and thinking about details and thinking about those three shots, the wide, medium, and close. And then once you start establishing those shots, then it's time to be creative with the shots. And so this is sort of turkey country. Now, granted, all these pictures weren't used in the final project, but this is sort of how it was pitched. And so we open up with the scene setter. What's turkey country? Well, if you know about turkeys, if you have chickens in your backyard, those chickens like to roost up high as they can get. Turkeys are the same way. So in turkey country, you find these big trees that are along the creek drainages, and that's where you're going to find turkeys. And so they spend their day, our job may be going to work somewhere. Their job is to go out and keep from getting killed, find enough food to eat and water to drink, and then hopefully at a certain time of the year, which is the time we're in right now, March and April and into May, they find them a mate that they can procreate with and perpetuate the species for another generation. And so that's sort of the broad narrative of the story, is kind of what a turkey does in this short amount of time where it's frantic in the turkey woods and things are serious. Love is serious because love's important to them. and how do you tell that story? And so this is sort of my approach to it right here. And I'll annotate the various pictures in this essay with some explanation on some of them to kind of tell you what I was thinking as I went through. But again, we start with a wide scene just to kind of set the scene and tell the story. And so this would be an example of a medium shot. You know, one of the things that when turkeys go to sleep at night, they fly up into dead trees and roost in them. And so this shot was actually a little harder to get than I thought, because turkeys are real sensitive. They're like, if you've got, I mentioned chickens earlier. If you have chickens, you know that you can go up to a chicken at night and pick it up because they can't see in the dark. And turkeys are the same way. They're just, when it's dark, they can't see. And so they're real skittish if you get close to their roost. And a lot of times if you bump them off their roost, they'll go find another roost somewhere and they'll just vacate the area. And so not wanting to do that or approach them, really what I tried to do is find a roost that was close to a road somewhere, because I knew if I didn't get out of the truck, they saw cars go by all the time and cars wouldn't necessarily spook them. And so I actually found this roost that was close to it. It was probably, I don't know, maybe 50, 75 yards off the road. And I was able to roll out there in the morning as the sun was coming up and shoot a picture of them on the roost. And so we start our journey of the turkey, the day in the life of a turkey, where they start in the trees. And soon after, they do the next logical thing is they fly down. And this was another tough shot. It took me a while to get. I wanted a picture of a turkey flying, but more specifically, I wanted a picture of a turkey flying it's sunrise, and so flying down off the roof. So that's the shot we have here. And then, this is kind of the three shots that are a couple of the concepts we talked about earlier, where the picture on the left that's a close-up shot where you're introducing a character. You're getting to see the turkey's face and what he looks like. You're getting to see the details of those caruncles on his neck, or the little appendage above his beak is called a snood. And you're getting to see some detail in that. And it's really kind of a character study on what a turkey looks like. Picture on the right is just sort of in the habitat they live in. It's a little wider shot. It works nonetheless, but it's a little wider shot and shows a little bit about sort of the area they're living in. And then the picture of the bottom is turkeys move about during the day, especially as they fight with one another and tussle. They'll lose feathers, and a lot of times when you're walking around, you'll find these feathers just laying on top of the grass and of the brush. And so that's part of the story of the turkeys. Is that's one of the detail shots I'm talking about that I'm always on the lookout for. And to me, as you start taking these pictures and you get plenty of shots, then you can start being creative. These are silhouettes, but that's a front lit shot. That's kind of photography 101. But the picture on the left, it's front lit. But then you start thinking about, well, how can I make this more interesting, and try to set yourself up in the position like the turkey in the upper right to backlight shots. And so that's what I was doing here. And then the bottom right, I just thought that, when I first looked at that picture, it was compelling on its own front lit, but when I moved around to the other side of it and backlit it, the whole feather just shined. And so that's why I chose to backlight it. So that's one of the things as you're fleshing out these subjects and you get an opportunity to do this later on, you can start getting real creative. Like, as I was working on this project, I didn't have pictures of turkeys drinking water. And so I didn't do it just for this reason, but where I used to live was an arid part of Texas. And so if you just add water, you'll have a lot of wildlife coming into it. So I built a little pond behind my house. It was maybe 30 feet long, maybe 10 feet wide, that when it would rain, the water would run off my roof, down through my gutters, had the gutters piped underground, where it would flow through the underground pipes down the hill into this pond. And so during the season, since I had a turkey roost just right off my fence line, those turkeys would always come to my property. And so then it was just sitting in a blind and waiting for them to show up to drink. I'll point out one thing to you, and I didn't notice this when I first shot this picture, but this hen turkey drinking, if you look at the water at the end, it looks like a little person that's touching the turkey's beak. And once that person showed me that, I couldn't unsee it. But it's kind of a cool little splash that I captured right there. But anyway, so I'd mentioned earlier that a turkey's job is to go out every day, eat, drink, and find love during the spring. And so oftentimes they'll start off with just feeding and trying to fill up because they went a long night with no food or no water. So they're just trying to get their day started, just like we do with a cup of coffee. Drink of water and a few seeds or bugs go a long way for these guys. And then turkeys, you know, I started finding these little blown out sand pits in the ground, and I knew what they were because again, growing up on a small farm, we had chickens. Chickens did the same thing, but they'll find an area and they'll scratch it out and they'll make like a dust pit, and that's where they dust because they dust for a couple of reasons. One is it helps keeps insects off of them. Number two, these turkeys, especially in the spring when it's so humid overnight, they'll sit in these trees all night and they just get loaded down with moisture from sitting all night. It's just, think about if you've ever camped before and it didn't rain the night before, but you get out and there's water on top of your tent. It's just because the moisture that's collected from the humidity in the air overnight. And the same things happen to turkeys. And so this is one of the ways they try to dry out is they'll go kick around in these dust baths, take a dust bath for a while. And you know, it's not a sexy part of a turkey's life, but it's something they do. And so it's something I wanted to capture. And then as soon as they get done with their dust bath, they'll stand up and flap all the excess dust off of them. And then you can see there's another one flapping. And then the picture on the right, another detail shot, you know, it's just a filler shot because turkeys got to walk somewhere. I mean, they get from point A to point B. They are a flying bird, but they prefer to walk everywhere they go as opposed to flying everywhere they go. And so because they walk so much, I was always on the lookout for a good set of tracks. And then because that's one of those details that helps kind of fill in the gaps of the story. It helps kind of, you know, subliminally you're thinking, well, these tracks are leading somewhere. It's taking the turkey from point A to point B and working at somewhere B. And who's the turkey that left it behind? Well, all of a sudden here he is. It's a Tom showing up on the scene. And he's doing something that used to read no time hunting magazines that they would tell you that turkeys will never go under fences or cross fences, but I took a picture of one doing it. So I'm not saying I'm the only one that's debunked that, but turkeys cross fences because I got the photographic proof. But all of a sudden, here they are. And so when you start talking about a new character being introduced in the tom turkey, because all we've seen so far are hens, and then we introduce the new tom turkey to the mix. Well, what are some character aspects of that tom turkey? And this is again where once you've got those three basic shots, then you start being creative. You know, when I was in Botswana last year, we took a bunch of pictures of elephants. Well, towards the end, and you saw a picture earlier, you start thinking about what kind of details can you take? Take pictures of the eyes if they get close enough. Take a picture of the feet, or like in this case, the turkey's feathers, because turkeys, not only do they try to make a show to the females by puffing out their feathers visually, they also try to make audible sounds to get a hen's attention. One way is gobbling. We all know that. Another way is they drag their feathers on the ground and it makes a scratching sound on the ground, and they'll make another sound called drumming. Well, you can't pick up that sound in a still photograph, but you can kind of contextualize it by taking a close-up picture of the wings. And oh yeah, by the way, if you notice on the wing, there's a feather missing. Well, where's that feather at? Well, there it is laying on the ground. And so that again ties the context in from the feather laying on the ground to, oh, he's missing a feather for some reason. And then the picture on the lower right is just his sexy legs that he's out for the day getting ready to go. And then so this is more toms. And again, in this example, these aren't all the same birds, all the same toms, but this is just kind of a day in the life of turkeys in turkey country. And so the toms are out on the prowl then. They're looking around. On the left, he's looking. On the right, he's preening his feathers a little bit. You can see one kind of flying in the air where he's picking out all the bad feathers and trying to make himself as pretty as he can, because once they get food in their belly and water in their belly, they're looking for love. And so what does love look like? Here we go. They'll get out and strut all the time, or they'll you can see the one in the upper right, he's gobbling to a hen right there in the foreground, or those are two toms in the lower right. But of all the turkey pictures I've ever taken, the one gobbling is really about my favorite. It's that was actually taken in someone's side yard. They were telling me, oh, we've got turkeys in my yard every day. And so I went to their house one morning. Sure enough, I was sitting in the blind. What you can't see is to the left, the guy's house. I was sitting in the blind taking pictures of these turkeys because I knew, and this is something you learn, tom turkeys, to get the advantage over the other ones, they try to look bigger because that's when they puff up their feathers. But another way they try to look bigger is they'll always try to take the high ground. So I found a place that was elevated that I knew he would be strutting on, or I thought he'd be strutting on. I didn't know it, but I thought he'd be strutting there, and that's where I set up at. And sure enough, because I'd pre-scouted the day before to kind of visualize what I thought I'd get. And sure enough, sun's low on the horizon. It'd been up for maybe 15, 20 minutes. He shows up on that little knoll, strutting back and forth, and all of a sudden he starts to call, and I was ready to take the picture. One of the things that I talk about a lot in photography is try to control all the aspects of it that I can, like understanding how to use my camera or having a good sense of where the animals might be. And I try to control all that stuff to the point where the uncontrollable part takes place is, will the animals show up or not? And at that point, if I've done all my homework and I put myself in the best situation, I'm still going to have a good time whether the animals show up or not. But when they do show up and you're ready and things become a lot more purposeful in your photography, then you start getting shots like that. And again, that's my favorite, probably my favorite turkey gobble shot I've ever taken. Just love that picture. Just tells a lot about the bird. The colors are just absolutely beautiful in my opinion. And then if you got one turkey around, you'll be joined by those soon. They'll be joined by others because these toms are all vying for attention of these hens. And these are 3 toms that were right behind my house just a few years ago that I took the shot. And you can see there the beauty of these birds. I mean, they're just stunningly beautiful, really, really iridescent, and they make interesting characters in this little movie that I'm calling Turkey Country. And then, so this one, they were so dang close to me. I couldn't get. I'd rather be further back. But you take what you get when it comes to wildlife. But the one thing that gives a little context clues is all of a sudden we see this out of focus head sticking up in the lower left hand side of the frame, and that's the hen that they're gobbling at. They're all trying to get her attention. And if you look at these turkeys, you can see individual differences in them. Turkeys are kind of weird. They'll all hold their mouth open at a different angle to try to be loud. But if you notice the little stripe on their foreheads, one doesn't have one has a small stripe, one has a big stripe, and you start learning these individual nuances and characteristics of these turkeys, and they're like individual characters in a movie. And so they become, if you watch a nature documentary, almost all nature documentaries, when they're focusing on one specific species of animal, they'll name that animal because they want to make it like a character in a movie. Well, I didn't have names for these animals, but if I wanted to, if I was doing a documentary about them, I could, because you can tell the characters apart from the unique characteristics that each one of them have. And so I mentioned earlier, before you start getting those yearbook shots I talked about, the identifying shot, the shot that kind of puts it in context, the environmental portrait, and then the animal doing something. Then I start looking for shots that are kind of, a little bit more creative. It's easy to think of this shot where the toms are in focus and the hen's out of focus. Well, then you start thinking, well, there's 2 parts of this equation. It's, the toms are beautiful and they're interesting. The hens are a little more drab and plain, but the hens are half of the story. And so you got to include the hens in part of the story. And so how do you do that? Well, one way I did it is just chose to focus on this hen that was closer to me than the toms. Now the toms are out of focus and you can tell they're there. And so it's a little bit subliminal, but they're still part of the story, but they're a supporting part of the story at this part, because now we've turned our attention on character development with the hen and trying to learn more about the hens. And this shot here, so this turkey on the left here that's gobbling this is him in this fight scene I have here, because this is all of a sudden we've introduced the characters, and then now we're in the drama, the conflict part of the story. So we're in Act 2 all of a sudden. And Act 2 is conflict, and it's more jockeying for position, and the male's desperate attempt to try to breed the females before their breeding season is over. And so because they don't breed year round, they've got this one season they try to get all their eggs hatched in, so that way their poults are hatched when there's the most bugs are out in the area, because the baby chicks eat bugs mainly when they start off. And so they naturally, the timing of the hatch occurs in late May, early June, whenever there's the most abundance of food for their babies to be most successful. And so all this drama takes place again in April, mainly kind of peaks in late April, early May. But this is one of the dramas. You have fights amongst the birds. And so the turkey that's fighting on the left is the picture you saw, a goblin that I just showed you. And so this shows another aspect of turkey culture in that all these young ones, if you start noticing their little appendage that sticks out of their chest, if you don't know, it's called a beard. And that beard is about the texture of like a horse's tail or a horse's mane, but that beard hangs out of it. And the older a turkey gets, the bigger the beard will get. Well, these young turkeys have little stubby beards. These are like, year-old birds that were born the last year, and they have these short little stubby uh, beards. And so these young male turkeys are called jakes. And so the jakes have no status in the turkey hierarchy. They're low in the pecking order. So in order not to get beat up all the time by the toms, they'll gang up together in packs and kind of hang out like a teenage gang might. And so they kind of hang out together because they believe there's force in numbers. And when they show up on the scene, oftentimes if there's only a lone tom there, they'll gang up on the tom and try to run the tom off and then take the females from it. And so what I love about this shot, could have been composed a little better. I mean, and this is how it came out of the camera. And I like to show this just to talk about when things happen, they happen fast. If I had it do over again, I might have had the whole scene shifted so I wouldn't cut the edge of this turkey on the left off. But the thing I love about it is the body language of each individual turkey, like the one that's underneath the mature bird to the left, how he's squatted down and he's ready for action. And then the one over on the right, how he's watching the action and he's trying to figure out what's going on. And for the different reactions of the different jakes, I just love it. And so this fight ended, and I've got pictures of it. I just didn't include it in this one. I probably shot 200 pictures of this sequence. This fight ended where the tom was victorious. This fight lasted about 30 seconds. Tom was victorious. He chased all the jakes off, and they went on about their way, and he went back to Goblin. And so there you can see what he's up against. The picture on the left is a tom and a bunch of hens there. And then in the picture on the right is a tom at half strut. And then more drama occurs. They go through this frenzy where they're gobbling all the time. They're looking for mates. And the way it works in turkey world is the tom will strut in one area. He'll gobble at the hens and try to get the hens to come to him where he can breed them. And so as you take pictures of them strutting, and you got plenty of pictures, then I start looking for shots like that on the right of so it's not a good angle of the turkey, but it's walking away, and it shows some details in it, all in itself. Turkey has multiple sides. I just try to take pictures of all of them. And then more and more drama here. Again, we're in the second act. First act, we established the scenes, we established the characters. The second act, we're kind of heightening the drama, whether it's the turkey's goblin looking for mates, or whether they are fighting with one another. And so just more goblin shots. See, there's an example. I talked about the turkeys. You can see these two toms that have their mouth open in kind of different angles. And this guy, he's going for it. Got his mouth wide open, and he's really trying to vocalize and get that sound out there. And then once we get past that, we're kind of in the last act of the resolution. All that fighting and strutting and carrying on is done for a reason, and that's to create the next generation of turkeys. And so really this is sort of the resolution to all that conflict. So we're in the third act now. And again, it's we talked about the three shots, the wide, medium, and close up. In the left-hand shot, even though it's not a classical landscape shot, it's technically a landscape shot because it's this egg, and this, I went back and found this egg again later, and I think it was a young hen that probably built this nest. She probably didn't know what she was doing, and so she had a clutch of about 3 or 4 eggs in this one. But I shot it with the wide angle lens, so it puts it kind of in context of where her nest was. Is by this stump. You can see the tree in the background. It's mainly open country like these turkeys live in, but you can see the semblance of a nest she's starting to build. And then there's another one there. That turkey just laid that egg that she's looking at there. But that's sort of more of so we got a wide angle shot on the left, medium shot on the right, and then close-up shots. And then after, I think it's 20, may correct me on this one, I think it's 28 days, after a 28-day incubation period, the younger hatch, and they'll follow mama around and stay as close as they can to her because she is their only source of protection until they get savvy about the world and can kind of make it on their own. These turkeys here are probably 3-4 weeks old. And the reason I know that is they're starting to get their adult permanent feathers in, and that's about the time they should be getting those in. They're not quite as fluffy like day old turkeys. So they're getting around pretty good. And they're following mama along as she's feeding. So this would be more, kind of more resolution. The eggs are laid, and what comes from the eggs? The baby chicks. And then once that's done, we kind of in the there was no point in showing you full grown birds again. So we end the day with, or we end the time with where we started, and that's turkey going home to roost. And this was kind of the last shot of the day as the sun was going down. This turkey was doing one last strut in the evening, trying to catch the attention of the females, and that's kind of my approach. And again, it's the same close, wide, middle shot for the reasons I talked about, and it's doing that over and over and over again with different characters and different scenes. And so that way, when you start putting everything together, it makes kind of a cohesive story and a natural story, and a good way to present natural stories. Again though, it's not anything automatic. It's muscle memory, and it takes practice. And so I encourage you to get out and practice, and you make those shot lists and do all those things you can just to get out and enjoy nature and enjoy and learn more about subjects. And that's the reason I love photo essays so much, is it gives me a chance to dive in depth. I'm not a drive-by shooter at that point. I'm not just, going out and all of a sudden I see a woodpecker and I take a picture of a woodpecker and I'm kind of done. It's kind of forcing me to work on personal projects to enhance my photo skills. Number one, just the rote technical abilities with the camera. Number two, it forces me to be creative and start trying to see these animals or these landscapes in different ways that I've never tried to look at them before, or maybe you get lucky and it's a way that no one else has ever seen them before. And then number three, it's just another way of enjoying nature. And the more you're out, the more you learn, not only about your camera, but also about the natural world around you. And the more you learn, the more you care, and the more you care, the more you try to do something to conserve the great natural resources that we have, not only in Texas, but around the rest of the country and parts of the world. And so that's the point. I would have questions, but since this is a re-recording, you'll have to send an email to me if you have any questions or comments about what I've said. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, leave it in the comment section below. If you like these webinars and you want to see more of them or more behind the scenes stuff, wildlifephotoshow.com. That's sort of that's my educational website. I've also got russellgraves.com, but that's kind of my business to business facing site. But you can take a look there at wildlifephotoshow.com and see a bunch of good content there. And then stay in touch. There's my email address. Sometimes it takes me a day or two to answer emails. But if you'll go to russell@russellgraves.com, I always answer emails. May take me a day or two, but I'll get back with you. And you can find me on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and then you can connect with me through those mediums as well. And I think that's the last slide. But again, the live version where I took question and answers during the presentation, I'm going to say user error. I didn't hit the record button, and so it didn't record. And so this is my replay of it, where I came back in literally about 30 minutes after I finished the last one. I re-recorded this one so everyone would have it. But here it is. Hope you enjoy it. Send me a message. Reach out to me. Hope to see you somewhere soon. Take care.